I'm your host, Con from Hollywood Studios,
I'm your other host, Josh from Tri-State Coasters,
and you're watching the Launch Time
a
Podcast.
podcast all about roller coasters.
Today, we will be discussing the idea of Cedar Fair owning Six Flags Great Adventure in Jackson, New Jersey.
That's right, this is our home park, and it is currently owned by Six Flags, a large amusement park chain. And while we do think Cedar Fair would be the most likely candidate for acquiring the park, we're going to highlight some of the other amusement chains and then say what we think they would do to improve the park from Six Flags ownership.
So first, let's take a look at SeaWorld. So Josh, what do you think about SeaWorld owning the park?
So, in case anyone doesn't know, SeaWorld owns 5 major parks, 2 Busch Gardens parks, and 3 parks called SeaWorld. Most of their parks are towards the southern part of the U.S., and Great Adventure is in New Jersey, in case anyone doesn't know, and that's in the northern part of the U.S., so I don't think SeaWorld is very comfortable with this market. While I don't think SeaWorld would be a likely contender, I do think that there would be potential in the park being called like Busch Gardens because there are 2 Busch parks under the SeaWorld ownership, Busch Gardens Williamsburg and Busch Gardens Tampa, and these tend to feature a lot of land animals, and Great Adventure has a safari. So I do think this would be a good fit. SeaWorld just wouldn't be the right owner for this park. It's very coaster focused, and the atmosphere really isn't that nice. So it would take so much improving to bring it up to the standards of a Busch Gardens park. So, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of the points you touched on. Great Adventure really does not have the kind of appearance to be a Busch Gardens park. If you guys have been to Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, or Tampa, you would know that they really do focus on plants and animals and just looking nice. They focus more on the appearance rather than the coasters, which I do sometimes value over coasters. I do still prefer Busch Gardens over Great Adventure personally. But yeah, I definitely don't think SeaWorld would own Great Adventure.
Yeah. Now let's move on to Merlin. So, what are your thoughts on Merlin? Tell us a little bit about what that is.
Well, Merlin, I don't know too much about Merlin, mainly because most of their parks are overseas in
Yep.
Europe. I know they do own Thorpe Park and Alton Towers, if I'm not mistaken, and those parks they're very nice looking. At least Alton Towers is. I don't know about Thorpe Park. They're also very coaster focused, but at the same time, they still seem to have a very different atmosphere from a Six Flags park. And to convert Great Adventure to that kind of atmosphere would probably be pretty difficult. I'm not sure of any of their parks in the U.S. if they have any. Josh, do you have anything to say about that?
Merlin in the U.S. owns the Madame Tussauds wax museums. While those are not amusement parks, just wanted to is it many people have been to those, and those are a Merlin attraction. But Merlin does own the Legoland parks in the US, and they tend to own most of the European parks. And like you said, Colin, Merlin wouldn't be a good fit, kind of similar to SeaWorld, because they have to do so much theming to up the park to their standards. And they
Exactly.
tend to install rides with a very high reliability. And the way Six Flags maintains all their rides and some of the manufacturers they've worked with are not very reliable. So I just don't think Merlin would be a good fit overall. And they haven't done too many major parks in the US anyway. So this wouldn't be a good fit.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The theming at Merlin parks definitely seems to be a lot higher than Six Flags parks.
Yep.
Same with Busch Gardens parks. And Six Flags really, as we all know, really just does not theme their rides that much, with the exception of Justice League.
Yeah. So now let's move on to the top contender, and that is Cedar Fair. So tell us a little bit about Cedar Fair.
Now, for those of you who don't know, Cedar Fair owns a lot of parks in the U.S. and one park in Canada. They own some very major parks such as Cedar Point, Kings Island, Canada's Wonderland, Knott's Berry Farm, among many, many others. They do have a Cedar Fair park very close to Great Adventure, which is Dorney Park,
Yep.
but that park is somewhat neglected by the chain. It's not as neglected as something like Michigan's Adventure, but they don't care for it too much. But I do think that if they were to take in Great Adventure, they could very easily give it that Cedar Fair feel. All they really have to do is replace some of the facades, repaint the rides, do some better landscaping, and obviously revert the name back to Great Adventure, and you got yourself a Cedar Fair park.
Yeah. And I personally like the Cedar Fair model. A lot of their newer rides have some theming, but the whole park, it looks nice. They have great operations. The rides are generally open, and they know how to run a park with still being able to focus on crazy roller coasters rather than just tons of theming. So it's a cool balance between a nice atmosphere, nice coasters, and you know you're going to have a good time, which at some of the smaller Six Flags parks can kind of be a gamble.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think we should move into our next point, which is how Six Flags, they were going into bankruptcy around 2009, 2008, right around the economic recession. And they were selling off some parks, and that includes a park like Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom. So Cedar Fair was also buying parks at this time when you look at the 2006 acquisition of all Paramount parks. So who's to say they wouldn't have bought more parks? And that's why I think that they would have bought some more Six Flags parks if they were selling something like Great Adventure.
Yeah.
So other than Great Adventure, what other Six Flags parks do you think they were considering purchasing?
Well, if all the parks were up for sale, just putting that out there, I would say they'd be most likely to buy Over Georgia and Great America. And Over Georgia is an hour outside of Atlanta, and Great America is about an hour outside of Chicago, if anyone doesn't know. Those are both Six Flags parks. But the reason I say Great America is, first, there's not a lot of other parks around there, and it's a very, very busy park. So I think that park is good for revenue and doesn't take up a huge amount of space. So I think that would be a good acquisition. And Cedar Fair already owns California's Great America, which was the other Great America park in California. So they already know kind of like a general layout and some of the pre-existing rides that were there. And then Over Georgia would also be a good acquisition because there's not a lot of other parks around there. So if you added some big coasters and some theming, you can make it like a destination, and something I think is pretty cool.
I have a feeling that they probably almost would have definitely bought Six Flags Magic Mountain, as even though it's only an hour away from Knott's, or approximately an hour away, that is Cedar Point's biggest contender. And I don't think they would let anyone else have that park, just so that they could kind of control who took control of the coaster capital of the world. They would probably relocate some of Six Flags Magic Mountain's coasters to other parks that need them more, such as Dorney Park, and they would probably let Cedar Point reclaim the title as the coaster capital of the world, and of course Great Adventure, just because of the location. Great Adventure has one of the single-handedly best locations of any amusement park in the world. Six Flags Great Adventure is located in between two of the largest cities in the United States, being New York City, which is arguably the largest city in the United States, and Philadelphia, which is also massive. And there's a lot of land around Great Adventure. It's in the middle of the woods, in the middle of the Pine Barrens in Jackson Township, New Jersey. And when you look around that park, other than a few things that have been built up around it, there's nothing around there. So there is definitely a lot of potential to turn Great Adventure into a resort park. And I have a feeling that Cedar Fair would definitely jump on that bandwagon.
Well, you also have to remember, like, you highlight that it's between two cities, but let's also remember all of New Jersey, this is their main amusement park. And then Delaware has no amusement parks. To the south, you have Six Flags America. Hershey isn't too far, but Great Adventure is the closest good park to all of Delaware. So it's really one of the, if not the best locations out of any park in America. It's like, and it is the world's largest theme park, if you include the safari. So it's, if they turned it into a resort, there's tons of space. It's in a great location. And yeah, it has a lot of potential. That's not always being used by Six Flags.
Now, one thing I would be concerned about with Cedar Fair owning Great Adventure is the safari park, because Cedar Fair, when you look at their parks, they really don't operate any animal attractions. If they do operate an animal attraction, it's something small, like in Frontier Trail at Cedar Point. They have like some goats and some cows, but like that's really nothing.
Yeah.
So I would be concerned about the safari. Maybe they would have someone, like an outsourced company, come and help them manage it, or they would just manage it themselves and take on the task. But that's something I would definitely be concerned about.
We will continue the discussion of Cedar Fair's ownership over Great Adventure right after the short break. And we're back. We're now going to be talking about some of our ideas of what the park would look like if it was owned by Cedar Fair.
What the park would look like? I think what would what Cedar Fair would do is split the park a little more. So right now you have Six Flags Great Adventure, and even though the safari is part of the park, it used to be not. It used to be a separate park where you drive in with your car. But
Yeah.
even though it's connected now, it's barely even connected. So if they want to disconnect it, it'll be very, very easy. And the water park is Hurricane Harbor is completely disconnected. So if they called it they just called it Cedar Fair's Great Adventure, then they could advertise that there's three separate parks and then charge like a three-park ticket, and that can make them a lot more money because the safari is a big draw. But if you include it, some people might just be there for the coasters of the Great Adventure Dry Park. So I think that would be a cool like money-making opportunity. Call three different parks.
Well, I also think they would probably drop that Cedar Fair title and just leave it as Great Adventure because they don't really do that with any of their other parks, and I doubt Great Adventure would be any different. And I definitely agree that they would probably separate the three parks. They would also most likely add a hotel because you look at Carowinds now and how Cedar Point has been for a while. Cedar Point has 2 hotels on site. As far as I know, there's probably a whole bunch more. And there's campgrounds. There's a lot on the Cedar Point Island.
Yeah, it's like hotel
And
heaven.
who's to say they wouldn't do something like that at Great Adventure, which has basically limitless amount of possibilities because of how much land is around there. So I have a feeling that they would take Great Adventure and just do a complete 180 and make it one of the greatest theme park destinations on the planet.
But yeah, you can also like when you go to Cedar Point, which for anyone who doesn't know is this legendary amusement park in Ohio, arguably the best park in America, and it has a very cool atmosphere. There's a lot of hotels, there's a campground, and it's on its own like peninsula, so it feels very separated from the rest of Sandusky, which is the town it's in. So I think they could kind of use a similar like treatment to Great Adventure because when you enter Great Adventure, it kind of feels like you're leaving Jackson, you go down this little road into this like giant park with the world's tallest coaster. So if they kind of made it a new entrance and they added new signage, repaved the road, and they could also add a shuttle service between all three parks if they were to separate them. And this would make it feel more like a resort. You get three parks, a hotel. It feels far away from the rest of New Jersey and Jackson. That would be a cool feel.
I definitely think that's very achievable, especially under Cedar Fair's ownership. Because let's be real here, Six Flags is not about making a big resort that everyone's going to like. They're just about making the money. And I'm not trying to say that to kind of hit at Six Flags. That's just their business model. You look at the way they add attractions and how they present attractions. Well, it's nice. It's not Cedar Fair level or even SeaWorld level. It's just acceptable, but not what you would want. Like, just as an example, there's a lot of parts of the park where it's just in terrible condition.
Yeah,
You look
so
at the
run down.
Newtown Stunt Theater, it just looks terrible. And even the entrance, I get it's from 1976, 2 years after the park
You
opened.
could still put on new
But
paint though. It's
exactly,
yeah.
it could use a new paint job. It could just use a whole big redo, honestly. Give it one of those really nice Cedar Fair entrances, obviously minus the coaster, because how are you going to get a coaster going over the entrance at that park? But I definitely think that Cedar Fair could 100% turn that park into something that it isn't right now. And I'm not saying Six Flags is doing a bad job. I'm just saying that there could be a better job being done, and I think Cedar Fair would get it accomplished.
It's a different model. Cedar Fair likes making larger investments for potentially larger returns. Six Flags plays it a little more safe. But
So moving into our next topic, which is what coaster do we think Cedar Fair would add, and what coaster do we think they should add? So Josh, what do you have to say about that?
so if it's like a realistic coaster that it wasn't up to me, just what Cedar Fair would likely add, I do think a family coaster would be a good fit. And if this is maybe like a smaller GCI like Invader or even like Mystic Timbers, while it is a more thrilling based ride, it's good for all family members, like many GCI coasters, or maybe a Vekoma suspended coaster. But some kind of modern family coaster that would be like a good intermediate ride between Skull Mountain and Dark Knight, and then rides like Zorro and Superman. And then what do you think, Con? What do you think?
So I'm going to be honest here. Just judging off how Cedar Fair treats bigger parks when they first get a hand of them, I think they would go all in on a Giga Coaster. I think it would probably be B&M, but judging off the time that they were getting the park, which would be 2009, it could even be an Intamin. And what they could have done is they could have marketed it along with Carowinds Hypercoaster and King's Dominion's Giga Coaster, both themed after Intimidator. And maybe they could have made something similar to I-305 at the park that goes through the woods around right by where Jersey Devil is now.
Yeah. So now in terms of coasters that goes up to us, it would still have to be kind of like a pattern that Cedar Fair likes to follow. But this would be if the park was acquired in 2020, 2021. So looking at just the past few coasters Cedar Fair's built, what coaster would you want? So this could be Mack Multi-Launch, like Copperhead Strike, Dive Coaster, any B&M. So what are your thoughts on that?
Honestly, I think something the park needs desperately is a new dueling wooden coaster. And I have a feeling that they could add that dueling GCI model that was shown off at IAAPA a couple years ago.
That's a cool idea.
I have a feeling they could maybe squeeze it in where Rolling Thunder used to be, which would pay homage to that ride and give respect to El Toro, which is the bigger wooden coaster next to it. But I definitely think that would be a perfect fit for the park. Or even if they did something more tame, say they take something like Invader and make it dueling. I think that could work as well.
Yeah, and Cedar Fair does work with GCI. We know this. So if I were to add a coaster that I think that I would want that Cedar Fair would still do, would be probably a B&M Giga, or yeah, I'd say B&M Giga or Mock Multi-Launch. The only reason I'm choosing two coasters is because I think a Mock Multi-Launch is more likely. Because at B&M Giga, they already do have Nitro, and even though they like installing these Giga and Hypers, like at Canada's Wonderland and Carowinds, there's also King Ka, which is also the Strata coaster. So I do think it would be a Mack Multi-Launch, kind of like Copperhead Strike, and I do think that would be a good fit too, and make it a little more out and back. So the idea, like when I said this originally, the first thing that came to mind was, what if you took like a mini DC Rivals and made it launched? So that's this Mack Hypercoaster in Australia, but it's by the same manufacturer, maybe feature a non-inverting loop, and generally be more airtime focused rather than inversions. I think that would be a cool fit for the park.
I definitely think that could work. A Mock Multi-Launch would be a good alternative to King Ka, just because King Ka is that really intense launch coaster, and Mock Multi-Launches, they're known for having weaker launches, which could resonate much better with the general public and be seen as a more tame ride, one that everyone could enjoy. But I also do think that they would go along with the B&M Giga coaster because, like you said, they do generally install a B&M Giga and a Hyper at the same park. Yeah.
So this is just speculation, but if Cedar Fair were to come in now, 2020, 2021, and revamp one area and one coaster, what do you think that they'd be?
I think it would be Batman the Ride and Movie Town as an area. So for those of you who don't know, Movie Town and Metropolis are the areas that house most of the Batman themed rides. So you have Batman the Ride, the Dark Knight Coaster, Wonder Woman Lasso of Truth, Cyborg Cyberspin, and Justice League Battle for Metropolis. So for starters, they would obviously have to take all of those rides and completely retheme them. And unfortunately for Justice League, that could be removal, just because it's not really easy to remap an already heavily themed dark ride. Maybe they could come in, have Triotech try to redo it, or even Sally Corp. They could probably have them come in and retheme it. But I don't know if Justice League would really survive that. Cyborg, they could just give a new theme, a new name. Same thing with Wonder Woman. Dark Knight would be a little more difficult just because it's a wild mouse in a box with a lot of theming. So I definitely think they could probably try to revamp it to be like themed to New York City or something like that.
That'd be cool.
Because it kind of has this like crummy city kind of theme. And I mean, I'm not, shouting at New York City, but there's parts of New York City that aren't the greatest. I definitely think they could do that with the Dark Knight. But with Batman, I definitely think that what they would do is, because Batman the Ride was built in 1995, which from right now is about 25 years ago. That ride is old. Well, it was actually 1993, but it was around 25 years ago. So what they would probably have to do is they'd probably have to tear down all the track just because it's getting rough, it's getting rusted, and maybe even make a brand new layout that's different from a regular Batman the Ride layout.
That would be cool.
Have the same height, maybe, same general layout, but change things up a little bit. and maybe make it a little longer. I definitely think that'd be great, because why not do that when you're taking down the whole station and queue anyway? So I definitely think they would completely redo Batman the Ride into a better B&M invert.
Well, yeah, you could also like keep the beginning, which is loop 0, another loop, and then after that have it go out like far back near where they store like the Congo Rapids rafts and like the park's maintenance area. You can make it go pretty far back and have kind of like an out and back-ish style invert. That'd be kind of cool.
I definitely think that's possible.
So if I were to revamp an area, I would say, actually, I would do Frontier Adventures, and I would go kind of like where the I forgot the name of the theater, but the one next to Bizarro and the Mine Train. If you rip down that theater and kind of started cutting into the safari a little bit, you can make one of these like Mystic Timbers, like that's a Rivertown now, and kind of where like the Twisted Timbers theme, kind of like this new theme Cedar Fair has been working with. Like it's kind of like where they have like an orchard or a farm, and something happens, some possessed alien, and they make it kind of like this cool woodsy feel with something a little creepy. So it's a scene on Mystic Timbers at Kings Island and Twisted Timbers at Kings Dominion. But maybe this is where they could also add that dueling GCI, or yeah, that you were talking about earlier into this section. And they would also just bring some new life to the Frontier Adventures. So yeah, I would add a GCI and put that in the new, like, I guess we'll call it Spooky Timbers area. And then for the revamp, I would also turn Frontier Adventures into Frontier Town, like at Cedar Point, and maybe rename the Mine Train into like, I don't have an idea for the name, but the Mine Train could use a repaint and whatever you call it. Rename the Mine Train, Log Flume could use new paint, and just kind of make that area Frontier Town, right next to this Mystic Timbersy area. So what do you think about that?
I definitely think that's a great idea, and bringing Frontier Town into Great Adventure would definitely be a fantastic idea, especially considering they already have some pretty good Frontier theming in the area, and to expand upon that and turn it into something like Cedar Point, I think that'd be a great idea.
And the Mine Train definitely needs a repaint, so it would, yeah.
It would definitely help the park out a lot.
So overall thoughts on Cedar Fair acquiring Great Adventure? Are we in agreement that it's better than Six Flags ownership?
Well, taking a look at how Six Flags is being run right now in 2020, they just came off of their former CEO, Jim Reed Anderson. And I know you're a stockholder, I'm not, but I've been able to see how the company has changed and how it's been run when he came in, and he kind of messed the company up. While he might be a meme, as everyone knows, in the announcement videos, he really did not do much good for the company. He really did run it out of money, and they did not have it structured very well. And because of that, I am hoping that Mike Spanos can really help the Six Flags chain. But if it does kind of start going bad again, I definitely think it would be very wise of Cedar Fair to swoop in and grab Great Adventure and even Magic Mountain while they can.
Yeah, and while Mike Spanos does seem to have a better presence in the company, he does focus on the international side of things because he came from PepsiCo, and his job there was working on the international side of stuff. And Six Flags has tried multiple times to make a China park, a Dubai park, and now they're trying for Saudi Arabia, and none of them went through. Saudi Arabia is still in the works. But I think Mike Spanos is still going to try to focus on that, which is a little sad because Six Flags in North America can use a lot of TLC as it is. So
I definitely think that if he does decide to focus on international, the company is going to go right back to where it was, and it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah. So we're both in agreement that if Six Flags started getting a little worse, which is likely, then Cedar Fair would be our personal choice of the best chain to swoop in and revamp Great Adventure into its better state.
Let us know if you guys agree or disagree with Cedar Fair owning Great Adventure. And Josh, any final thoughts?
No, just saying what you said. Yeah, just let us know your thoughts on this potential acquire, and be sure to stay tuned for the next episodes on Launch Time Podcast.
I'm your host, Colin from Hollywood Studios.
I'm your other host, Josh from Tri-State Coasters.
And this was the Launch Time Podcast. Thank you all for watching.